So for our next talk, I am very excited to introduce Scott Millar, who's the Deputy Chief Policy and Communications at Communications Security Establishment, CSE. He oversees directorates responsible for strategic policy and planning, domestic and international partnerships, strategic communications and disclosure, policy and review. Specifically, Scott leads CSE's efforts in domestic and international policy and partnerships, ministerial and parliamentary affairs, strategic and business planning, external reporting, operational policy development, legal disclosure, access to information and privacy, internal and external communications, creative services, and linguistic services. He also runs marathons, right, Scott? To fit that all in. Previously, Scott held executive positions at both the Treasury Board Secretariat and the Privy Council. He also served as a senior advisor to the Vice President Policy and Programs at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and as acting director of international relations at FINTRAC, Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing agency. Scott began his public service career in 1997 as a policy analyst within the Anti-Organized Crime Division at the former Department of Solicitor General, which is now Public Safety Canada. He holds master's degrees in political science and a BA in psychology from Carleton University and has certificates also from McGill University, the Canadian Foreign Services Institute, and Canada Forces College. He's published on issues surrounding ministerial accountability as well. In his spare time, he enjoys running, reading, and writing, and he and his wife, Kristin, have a busy household with 3 busy boys and 2 pets. So please welcome Scott.
I also like long walks on the beach. A little mortified by my bio. I think I'll have to trim that down a little bit. Thank you very much. I am very pleased to be here. I had a great time last night at dinner with the speakers and obviously thrilled to be sharing this time with them. I like coming to these events to kind of rest a little bit too. You were reading that list there. I was feeling a little tired. But I really love to just osmose and absorb, the energy and the passion of folks in the room around these kinds of events, and also hopefully pick up a few new things along the way. Last night in the conversations today certainly absorbed a bunch of stuff that I'm going to take back with me. And last night I osmosed a bacon cheeseburger at Wildcraft, and so that was lovely too. Look, I'm a chief privacy officer in an intelligence agency. That's kind of an interesting job. I am very passionate about the issues I'm going to talk about with you today. But given that I'm the kind of person where my folks don't ever write anything for me, they just give me 3 bullets and a microphone and I could go for 2 hours, I've actually written down what I'm going to say, which is a very rare thing for me. But I'm doing that because I really want to hit some important points, be precise, but also leave room for questions, because I imagine a few of you might have questions for me. I see Chris Parsons over there. We've been on a few panels. He might have a question for me or two. Always softballs, though. Okay, so I am going to share my viewpoints on security, intelligence, and privacy with you today. In an age where every time you turn on the TV or stream Netflix, there is a new show whose storyline is focused on a mysterious government agency using technology and data to track people. I suspect there are more than a few people in this room wondering why somebody from a mysterious government agency is speaking at our privacy conference. The main idea I want to share with you today is that national security and privacy are inherently linked. What I mean is that national security intelligence efforts protect Canadian society so that we are able to maintain the fundamental rights and freedoms we value as Canadians. And privacy is one of those fundamental rights. What's more, intelligence collection must be done in a way that does not undercut or devalue the fundamental privacy interests that are intrinsic to Canadian society. Simply put, national security protects our privacy. I don't want to take up too much time on formalities, but I would like to take a few minutes to talk to you about my organization. So this is going to feel like the lecture part of this. We're in an academic setting, so that's appropriate. I mentioned that there aren't many Canadians that are aware of what CSE is or what we do. In fact, our latest public opinion polling showed that only 3% of Canadians knew who we were without prompting, and 22% thought we were CSEs. For much of our 75 years of existence, we flew under the radar. In some ways, we were Canada's best kept secret. But times are changing, and we are working more and more in the public domain with partners in government, academia, and the private sector. We have a national cybersecurity awareness campaign called Get Cyber Safe, and we have 17 social media accounts. We use opportunities like this, speaking engagements, to share who we are and what we do, and to also build up partnerships with folks, and I'll get into that in a minute. And we take the opportunity to tell people what they can do to protect themselves and protect their information. We've opened the curtains, and it's a little scary but exhilarating for CSE. So as 3% of you in this room know, CSE is Canada's national cybersecurity and foreign signals intelligence agency. We play an integral role in helping to protect Canada and Canadians against cyber threats, terrorism, foreign espionage, and attacks on our democracy and way of life. Now, some of you might be a bit skeptical about the fact that we have both foreign intelligence and cybersecurity under one roof. On one hand, we collect foreign intelligence on our adversaries to inform decision makers about threats to Canada's interests, while our Cyber Centre, more on that later, focuses on ensuring Canadians are protected from harmful effects of online threats. But in fact, this dual mandate is our secret sauce. In fact, it may seem incongruous in terms of mandate alignment, but it actually makes a lot of sense. On one side of our mission, we're collecting intelligence about foreign threats to Canada, what tools and techniques they are using, and what targets they're using to exploit us. On the other side of our mission, we're trying to defend against these threats. Knowing who's involved, what their plans are, and how and when they may strike, that gives us a real advantage. We also know that at CSE, we are under more scrutiny because of the important work that we do. The government has entrusted us with a great responsibility, and our employees, as Canadians, take this responsibility very seriously. They would settle for nothing less than the highest standards of lawfulness, ethics, values, and the protection of the privacy of Canadians. Accountability and transparency for Canada's national security intelligence agencies like CSE is critical. Speaking from a CSE perspective, there are three main elements that drive our accountability and privacy protection regimes, namely our strict authorities, our policies, and our external review regimes. I'm going to apologize in advance if this is, again, going to feel a bit like a school lecture, but I think it's important to walk you through that because not everyone is always aware of these regimes. First, we're guided by the authorities in the new CSE Act, that was passed last August and came into force last August, along with directives, orders, and authorizations from the Minister of National Defence. This also includes the new role of an independent intelligence commissioner who also has to approve those authorizations and consider the potential privacy impacts. Internally, CSE takes these instruments and translates them into a very detailed set of operational policies. These policies establish specific measures to protect the privacy of Canadians and persons in Canada and how we use and retain information. I'll go into a bit more detail on this because there are always lots of questions, but maybe I'll give you an example. In the case where CSE targets and collects the communications of a foreign terrorist abroad who happens to be exchanging information with someone in Canada, our operational practices require that intercepted communications first be assessed to determine whether the exchange qualifies as foreign intelligence. If it does, CSE analysts annotate the information and handle the Canadian information in accordance with a suite of strict privacy measures. Strict retention limits and automated destruction schedules are in place as additional protections. If it's not considered foreign intelligence, the intercept is destroyed. To ensure our staff fully understand and abide by our operational policies, we regularly train and annually test them to verify their knowledge and compliance. They will be denied access if they do not pass, and this includes everyone, all CSE employees and executives, even myself. Every year I have to do these tests. Thirdly, because we're an organization that still needs to keep something secret, we benefit from a review function to assure Canadians when everything is fine and to tell Canadians when things aren't so fine and more work is required. So on top of the authorities, directives, policies that govern us, our activities are subject to independent review by NSIRA, this new National Security Intelligence and Review Agency just stood up, or the National Security Intelligence Committee parliamentarians that stood up a couple of years ago called NCCOP. I'm a government employee, I like acronyms. NSIRA, led by a fully independent committee, is appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. It's responsible for reviewing national security activities across the government, and they review CSEs activities for compliance with the law, ministerial direction, and our own policies, and ensure that those activities are reasonable and necessary. The agency has broad access to the information necessary to review all security activities across the federal government. In fact, they have offices within our building, and I will bump into them in the cafeteria. They can do on-site spot checks, what have you. It provides classified reports of its findings and recommendations to relevant ministers, and it produces an unclassified annual report tabled in Parliament summarizing these findings and recommendations. NCCOP, the top secret cleared committee of parliamentarians, can review and report on any aspect of CSE's activities as well. The committee is mandated to review the legislative, regulatory, policy, administrative, and financial frameworks of national security intelligence. They can secondly look at any activity carried out by a department that relates to security and intelligence, and they can also look into any matter referred to them by a respective minister of the Crown. And of course, in addition to all this, we're subject to review by the Privacy Commissioner, the Intelligence Commissioner, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the Commissioner of the Official Languages, and as well as the Auditor General, just like any other government department or agency. This review and oversight was designed to assure the government and Canadians that our activities are lawful, necessary, and proportionate. Transparency that is very important given our mandate. And so I'm going to get more specifically in some elements around transparency. CSE has worked hard over the last couple of years to help people understand what we do. It was funny, I was joking around with Jen a little bit when she used the terms snowed in. I remember I joined CSE in 2013, and I joined at the same time as a director of comms had joined, who was told this was the easiest comms job in government. It's always no comment, and you never get questions. People don't know who you are. And then the Snowden disclosures happened the next week, and he had the worst job in government. There was not a lot out there about who we are and what we do, and we hadn't done a whole lot of work ourselves to put together that picture. And so we had quite a transparency debt to pay off. It was telling people what we do, but then also importantly telling people what we don't do. And it's always been a challenge, understandably, because we have to protect important national assets. But I would like to say that although our methods and techniques and our targets need to remain secret, we have made great strides in explaining the concepts behind our work, our rule book, and our results where we can. And our world is becoming more open. In October 2018, we stood up the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. That brought together employees from across different units across government, basically 3 organizations that had been helping with cybersecurity both within the federal government and also helping those outside of government, and brought them together into a unique, innovative, forward-looking, open organization. In fact, most of the work done by that center is unclassified in nature. Building a front door for cybersecurity at the federal level was the intent. Through the Cyber Center, we'd lead the government's response to cybersecurity events and work to protect and defend the country's valuable cyber assets. We work side by side with the private and public sectors to solve Canada's most complex cyber issues. And we defend the Government of Canada systems against all sorts of malicious activity and then share what we learn with others. So when you think of federal government systems holding employee insurance information, taxpayer information, your information, right now we block up to 2 billion malicious cyber attempts a day against the Government of Canada systems. That's 2 billion a day. We're protecting your information held on those systems. We know threat actors want our economic and national secrets and our personal information for any number of reasons. Sometimes they're just a nuisance, and other times they present legitimate threats and can cause damage to government, the private sector, and Canadians. The Cyber Center is a defender, certainly has a unique advantage no one else in Canada has. CSE's knowledge and aperture allow us to understand the worldwide threat environment as threats develop. Now, I've talked about foreign intelligence, cybersecurity, and privacy as it applies to CSE, but really privacy protection more broadly starts with all of us. The reality we all need to face when it comes to promoting and protecting personal privacy is that we live in a world where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or password are the most commonly used passwords in Canada. And that's all that stands between us, or you, and the people that want to steal our information. To be clear, that's really not a joke. According to the latest security breach statistics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was seen 23 million times. I bet there's some in here who maybe put up your hand. No, don't put up your hands. That's not a good idea. I don't want to know your password. I don't want direct at Canadians. You know, it's forbidden in our legislation. As much as we might laugh about, privacy and security are both under attack all the time by the people who put far more thought into our security than most average Canadians do. In a world of quick convenience, this is more important than ever. Now, we heard this a bit this morning, but certainly we walk around with very powerful technology in our smartphones. We all know that. We have the ability to essentially snap our fingers and order the Uber or order the food wherever we want, connected to anyone, anywhere in the world. And the more things we can do easily through the power of the internet, the more easily we can do it, the less we want to think about what we're putting out there and how it impacts our lives. We click away our privacy. We compromise our security, and we still use the password, because we have reached a point in society where nearly everything is effortless. That's intentional. App developers, as we know, know that there are too many steps. You're going to walk away and use somebody else's app, and they don't want to miss their chance to gain a customer. So without even thinking about it, many people decide it's not worth the time to invest the effort in their own security. That's why at CSE we're always working to protect against external threats, while letting Canadians know the steps they can take to protect themselves. Because even if the system works perfectly, there's not much that can be done to help if you leave the front door open and a large welcome mat out for privacy thieves. Sometimes we get tricked into leaving the front door open, like when you get a text message from the bank for the first time suggesting your card has been compromised and ask you to validate your credentials. That's happened to me, I think, twice in the last month. Instead of clicking on the link and re-entering the password, people must be cautious and investigate these types of texts and emails. Understanding the prevalence and nature of phishing scams, which predominantly present themselves in email form and try to pass themselves off as links to trusted sites, is one of the 5 key techniques we try to teach Canadians in order to protect themselves. So the Cyber Center, I'm going to give you the Cyber Center top 5 tips. You can write these down or visit our website, #shamelessplug. So spotting phishing and smishing scams is best practice number 1. I had never heard the term smishing before. That was a new one for me this last week. Apparently that's when it involves text. You all know this. I don't. I'm on a journey of learning. The others are number 2, use good password etiquette. Again, if I come away from here and half of you, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, change that. That's a good outcome for me. Third one, secure your social media. Ramp up your privacy settings. Use 2-factor authentication. Number 4, store your data securely. Use only new USB memory sticks that you purchased, or turn on available security features when storing data in the cloud or online. And 5, lastly, please do hit update when devices and programs prompt you to. There are almost always key security patches in there to address new discovered weaknesses and, more importantly, combat newly discovered attacks. If you do these 5 things, your security online will be significantly stronger. So now you're looking at me and you're thinking, okay, well, that's what we should be doing, but what's the government doing with my information? Lots. I'm just joking. No one's laughing. First, I can assure you, CSE is not stealing Canadians' information. We are charged with protecting it. Ask yourself the question, what's the point of national security if not to protect the country and its citizens, including their privacy? The mandate of CSE is to protect the security and privacy of Canadians in the digital world. We block, again, malicious attempts against our digital perimeter, and we build up our defenses against these threats as technology evolves, all in the context of keeping Canada and Canadians safe and guarded. But because the internet can be a mysterious and sometimes even scary place, it's easy for people to assume that everything we at CSE do must be equally mysterious and scary. In reality, we are working as best we can to protect Canadians, to protect their privacy, and so we do everything we can within reason and within the law. To fail to protect the privacy of our citizens wouldn't simply be acting in bad faith, it would be to fail in our mandate. From my perspective, that is literally my job. Every day I go to work with the singular goal of fulfilling our mandate to protect Canada and our country. In our organization, there are many folks that Google would like to hire and other folks would like to hire. The people that are there are passionate about what they do to protect Canada, and they have that real clarity of mission and care passionately about it. Like, if we don't think your privacy is secure, then nothing works for us. And nothing would work within Canadian society. Our increasingly eccentric economy collapses, our businesses cannot serve their customers well, and our citizens cannot engage in the digital world with a sense of security. To be successful, we need to work together, share where we can, and collaborate where we can collaborate. Cybersecurity is a team sport. We must work together, and security through collaboration is key. At CSE, we share threat information and cyber defense tools with partners in industry in order to increase the cybersecurity landscape of the country. For example, in 2017, we released an open source malware detection and analysis software platform called Assembly Line. Thanks to the software's automatic malware detection and sorting features, Canadian cybersecurity professionals, not just within government, can increase their effectiveness by focusing their efforts on analyzing anomalies as opposed to constantly dealing with routine and already known issues. We all benefit from this open source platform that allows us to collaborate and we automate the detection of malware and to share feedback within the community. In order to understand threat actors' motives and capabilities, we must constantly be sharing our helpful insights, whether that is with our foreign allies, academia, or industry. Of course, we're careful with the information we share, and the new CSE Act has provisions to ensure CSE is using, retaining, and disclosing cybersecurity relevant information received from industry in a responsible way. There's a popular privacy doctrine, you all know it, privacy by design, that stipulates that information collection and disclosure processes should have privacy protection measures built in, and we definitely subscribe to this doctrine. Additionally, entities that we engage with directly, beyond general advice and guidance, must be designated as information infrastructures of importance to the Government of Canada. In other words, the national significance of these infrastructures must be apparent to all involved before we begin providing tailored advice, guidance, and services. In addition, the Act limits our ability to disclose this information only when it's necessary to protect systems and networks. Again, at CSE, we see the importance of sharing information when appropriate and when the right protection measures are in place. Now, all this talk of information sharing and good communication reminds me of a famous fable. We already heard about the elephant and the rider. You're probably all familiar with 5 people wearing blindfolds, all touching an elephant and trying to identify what's in front of them. One person feels the trunk and suggests that it's a snake. Another feels a leg, suggests it's possibly a tree. Still another grabs the tail and thinks it's a rope, and so on. Each of the people have a different opinion on what is before them because they are interacting with a different part. Without the full picture, they could debate forever, all convinced that they are right and that their friends are wrong. Cybersecurity can feel the same. Each of us can be experiencing something different from another. If we only focus on our particular experience and what is directly in front of us, we can think that only we have the true perspective, when in fact what we are looking at is part of something incredibly bigger, more complex. If each blindfolded person had been open to working together with their friends, perhaps they would have been able to put together a more accurate picture and identify the elephant. I find this fable serves as a useful reminder. If I want to be a useful piece of the puzzle in the fight against cybercrime and the fight to protect privacy, I must be in constant communications with others who are experiencing things differently from me. To presume that I alone have the correct perspective and I alone have all the information necessary would serve no purpose other than ensuring that I would fail at my job. Cybersecurity, however, is even more complex and requires even more communication than trying to figure out exactly what an elephant is. That elephant is always morphing in a digital world. It's never static. Rather than intimidate us, however, I hope this simply encourages us all to use greater communication and work together, share what we know with increased humility, to be open, honest, and quick to act. There's virtually no industry today that isn't storing important information online, which means that all of us have a shared interest and shared priorities. A safer Canada is a more prosperous Canada. Just as we welcome people from all over the world who seek a physically safer, more secure future, we know that by making our digital world safer and secure, we are creating a safer and more welcoming digital world, where you can do business securely, where your private information is safe, where the government is working to protect its citizens. In our eyes, this all works together. There will always be those who work against us, those who threaten our security for political, criminal, or monetary gain. Notwithstanding that, I feel more hopeful for the future, because the bad actors who oppose us are giving up or getting lazy. It's quite the opposite. Rather, it's because I believe we are on a path to better cooperation than ever before. As new generations have grown up in this digital world, continue to join the workforce, whether in government agencies or like ours, or in the private sector, we are seeing a new generation that gets the importance of all this. The past decade saw a leap into information gathering, e-commerce, and quite frankly, a majority of people's lives moving online in a way that I don't think anyone was really ready for. But now we have a generation that is not caught off guard. A new generation is more prepared for a world of cyber threats and cyber opportunities. So that's why I'm excited to come to work every day and not ask, what's the elephant look like, but actually to consider and hear from others the questions that we should be asking ourselves that we haven't even thought of. I'm confident that as we educate today's digital citizens, as we work together, we can build a more safe and secure Canada. And I'm going to stop there. I know I read the thing, but I believe the thing, and I hope you hit me up on any questions and test my commitment.
Thank you, Scott. Is this on? Yes. Okay, I'm actually going to take the prerogative to ask the first question. Okay, so at the beginning of your remarks, you said that Canadians enjoy a right to privacy, and that's part of what makes Canada a good place to live in, and that's why CSE protects privacy, and there are safeguards, and there are all these ways to ensure that happens. Canadians aren't the only people that enjoy a right to privacy, right? Arguably, every human enjoys the right to privacy. So how are their privacy rights guarded in relation to CSE's actions? And why is it okay if not?
Yeah, okay. So I guess a few things there. I mean, what I can speak to is what CSE does, because when it comes to protecting privacy in all of Canada, there are many different government departments and international partners, and we all have a role to play in all this. Yeah, we are a foreign intelligence agency. I mean, we are, we're bound by legislation. We operate within legislation. I'm probably going to be loath to give my opinion on some of this stuff because I'm also somebody here to explain what it is that CSE does as opposed to sort of suggest where policy should go or shouldn't go. I'm a public servant, nonpartisan, and have to respect all that stuff. But when, I guess similar to domestic law enforcement, like we're not an investigatory body, we don't target Canadians. But we do have security agencies to keep us safe, and they do need to find out information and methods and techniques, who's looking at Canada, what are they planning to do. I think there's probably an impression out there that CSE is hoovering up the internet. That would be impossible even if we were to try and do that. We do use information to discover targets, to collect on intelligence priorities that are given to us by cabinet that we have to follow by law to discover those targets of foreign intelligence value and collect that information, make that available. So it's a mandate that we've been given. It is the idea of focusing in not just on all the world abroad, but focusing in on those threat actors for the purpose of informing how we might best protect ourselves. Should those threat actors have a right to privacy similar to people that are just doing things online? That's I'll open that up to the floor, but that's how we're organized.
So you mentioned the amount of attacks that happens and you're able to detect. Do you have like a specific case that you can share, for example, with a plot of terrorist group or some activity on the Canadian territory that you were able to, using your technology, to detect and to avert? Or, for example, can we say that in Canada we cannot have a kind of 9/11 event where if you were able, I guess, if you were able to detect the communication between the attackers, you could have prevented it, yeah?
Yeah, I guess a few things. One is, if you look on it as a continuum, I mean, we've operated online for a long time. We use the online space to, first of all, understand the threats coming at us. In the past, what we would have done is seen those threats and just kind of share that out with folks to do something with it. But ultimately, it's to make sure that we have an aperture and we see the threats that are out there. Then we use that to inform what we need to do to protect our systems and help other people protect their systems. That's that defense side. But then we get into a contest side. So where you have a brazen foreign threat actor coming at us or coming at Canadians, and CSE was given a mandate to conduct cyber operations to minimize the impact or end the impact of that threat. Within that space as well, we also do attributions. And so in terms of examples, there are examples where we have joined with our partners throughout the world in calling out Chinese threat actors based in Russia, targeting things like WADA, the anti-doping agency, or using ransomware attacks. So those are ones where we have a responsibility to protect a system, and we that's how we've made that kind of thing public. Where we have intelligence that requires investigation or prosecution or response by another government department or agency, we share that with them, and then they use that, and then they would be the ones to speak to the results of that if that ended up with, say, prosecution or what have you. But from the CSE perspective, where we're end users of our information, that's where we're blocking the systems that we are in fact protecting, and that gets into the government system space. So those, I won't give specific examples, but we are blocking that, where we're helping other network owners, business owners that have been designated as infrastructures that we can support. That would be them to speak to it, and we have non-disclosure agreements with them, but we basically work as network security providers to them. So yeah, in the intelligence space beyond cybersecurity, we've helped deal with kidnapping plots. We've helped to disrupt terrorist attacks, and we have also worked in the military operational field, like we did in Afghanistan. So there are a lot of broad different things we've done, but yeah. I hope I didn't skate your question, but that basically is about as much detail as I can give specifically.
There's been this constant debate about who's responsible for protecting users' privacy. Is it users themselves? Are the businesses responsible? Are the technology manufacturers responsible, or is the government responsible? So I'm wondering what the CSE's perspective on that.
That's a larger than CSE mandate kind of question. I think that certainly when it comes to the cyber center, the information we're putting out there for those that are responsible for information, whether it's their own information they have on their systems or they're storing others' information to harden themselves as a target. We had a little bit of a chat about this last night around dinner. I think you get in the space of the moral hazard around any kind of risk decision anybody makes, whether it's cybersecurity or whatever, where the actual risk owner, the person impacted, is not involved in that decision. And I think that's always very important to look at the responsibilities and accountabilities and think about what each of us are responsible for in that space. I think some good points were made, obviously, around the degree to which people understand the decisions that they're making and that all of the information is there and that they're meaningful decisions. But that's what I would say about that. Yeah.
Hi, Scott. So I have any number of questions I could ask.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I will. I'll narrow it down to one in particular.
Yeah.
So, CSE recently, very positively, released their vulnerabilities equities management framework that begins to suggest how the CSE looks at vulnerabilities and the conditions under which it will report it to the parties whom are affected.
Right.
So I guess my question is sort of related, but or two questions, but they're pretty related. So one, sort of the broad level, will we or could we or might we expect a full vulnerabilities equities process similar to what the US and some of our allies have? It's very detailed. And the reason why I raise this is as a researcher in this area, I would like to know.
Yeah.
But I think more substantively, obviously the CSE and state actors are not the only players in the intelligence game. They haven't for a long time, but we look at Israeli companies such as NSO Group and other parties that are coming on board that are less human rights respecting. And I think it would be helpful to start understanding, as a Canadian public, how does CSE, as an example, deal with situations where you discover or realize that those non-state actors are selling vulnerabilities, and how do you handle them? So I guess my question is sort of two-front. How do you deal with a situation, not necessarily NSO Group, I mean,
Sure.
but like of third parties who are propagating tools? And second, is there any possibility that we might see a more rigorous vulnerabilities equities process document coming out of the CSE, anytime, let's say, in the next recent or near future, rather?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's again, I think that's kind of a whole of government kind of question. If I probably had PCO here, I would say, hey, good question for the PCO person. CSE indeed has that process out. Look, we're a cybersecurity center. We are there to protect Canadians, and that's our stock and trade. So what does is suggested or actually explained in terms of our vulnerabilities equities process is that we become aware of a vulnerability, a Canadian is at risk, we responsibly share that information. So we have had McAfee and Microsoft and others publicly acknowledge and thank CSE for sharing those with them so that they could patch. So that is what we do, that is our responsibility, and we will always tilt towards the privacy of Canadians in that regard. And now, obviously, well, we've been reviewed for many years, but obviously the review has broadened, and so there will be those that are cleared to come in and actually study that process and the degree to which it's reasonable, necessary, and proportionate. When you're talking about encryption and vulnerabilities and technology, it is a larger than CSE kind of question, which is similar, the analog of why US involves many other different departments and agencies, investigators as well in that process. But I can only speak to the fact that CSE has had this process for a long time, and we did want to make that public so folks that do know that our first, that the primary focus of that and the only focus on that is to protect Canadians. So we're in the game of, we want all Canadians to have strong encryption. We want technology vulnerabilities to be managed and mitigated. And we, again, would be operating outside our mandate. I know that's not getting to everything there, but I think I can only speak to it from that CSE perspective.
Just a question a little bit different, but one of the things that have been raised about a number of different security agencies and the federal government has been challenges in recruiting diverse individuals to join them. And just wondering what kind of commitment there is, and if there is an effort, a very specific one. Of course, tech is generally very male and has a challenge in getting gender diversity, but just if you could comment about what are the tools and means, and of course there are a lot of vulnerable communities that have been disproportionately impacted by some of the surveillance of various agencies. And so, how do you overcome that in terms of actually pitching CSE as a place to work?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I'm glad you asked it because I wrote in the margins here to talk about diversity at a certain point and I didn't get to it. We chatted a little bit about this last night as well. Look, I don't want to do the whole, hey, we're 20% this and we're 30% that. There's more that CSE can do. We're at just looking at gender alone, we have 40% of our workforce are women. In the technology fields, we're at 20%. 20% is not 80% or 100%. We could do better, but it certainly is comparable. I think Google is the only one that has a bit higher than that at 21%. It's going to be a generational thing in terms of STEM and churning that over and getting girls in STEM. And there's a lot of things that we're doing with HackerGal and partnerships that we have to promote that and promote that in schools. Look, I'm the executive champion for Women in Defense and Security. I deal with other executive champions from other different departments and agencies. In fact, I'm going to be missing the scholarship breakfast next week because I'm at another conference. The idea, there is absolutely a social justice, fair element to it, but if you were just a misogynistic creep and just cared about your business and the diversity of challenges and complexity of challenges facing us, you need diverse people. You need different experiences, different competencies, different backgrounds, perspectives. I'm also the executive champion for the Young Professionals Network. We've got 500 of them. So when I was saying about the questions that we don't even know to ask ourselves, look, I go to these conferences, and this is great, this conference. Most of the ones I go to, it's guys like me, you know, pushing 50 or older, bald white guys, and the people that are diverse are the folks doing the logistics. And I'm horrified because I think, how do they feel welcome or not welcome as part of this community, and what kind of messages do we share? So we look at things like unconscious bias training as well. Certainly that, we found, there are risks in how you hire, right? You're looking for leaders of your tech organizations, but then you screen them out on technical competencies. And again, with STEM slowly coming on board and more for women, you actually end up screening out women when you're looking for all sorts of different kinds of competencies and not just the technical ones. You don't need them to be the uber technical analysts and smarter than everyone else that works for them. You need them to be able to lead. And there's certainly men and women that are fully competent to do that. And so I think as well, looking at pushing for hiring at the executive level and having good representation is another one. There is the element also around just, and the Transparency Advisory Group, I think I talked about this a little bit, but do we represent Canada? If you're looking at trust and confidence, do Canadians look at us and say, these are folks that share Canadian values and understand the country and not just Ottawa white males? And so that is another thing that, is an important element. We, again, don't target Canadians or anyone in Canada, so we don't deal with Canadian diasporas and all the rest, so the kind of answer I'm giving might be different than a CSIS and our RCMP. But also when we're thinking about, foreign intelligence, obviously we have folks with a variety of linguistic backgrounds as well. So, sorry that was long. I could go a lot longer on that one, but thank you for that question.
I want to continue this question about the employees. Let's imagine that there's another, the CSE is a huge organization, right? Lots of stuff can happen. So what if some employee sees something abhorrent and they feel moral obligation to report this to public?
Yeah.
So is there a law that will ensure that this person will not be persecuted?
Sure.
That's the first thing. And the secondly, when they become a whistleblower, they will be given for the rest of their life the same kind of payment, because they will never be hired by the government or something like that. So like
Sure.
ensuring that they have a payment and the pension. So this way we sort of level the field for those folks who can sort of say if there's something that
Sure.
happens.
Well, I guess I don't want to answer questions out of my depth. I do want to say that there is legislation around protecting public service employees who expose wrongdoing that's across all government departments and agencies. There might be different views on the effectiveness around that, but there is legislation around that. There is a process for CSE employees to disclose wrongdoing, and there are now the review agencies as well that can look into those matters. So that's what I can say about that, but there is that process, and it does exist. And yeah.
In one of your earlier answers, you said you want Canadians to have strong encryption, which is great to hear.
Yeah.
When I hear those words, I think about encryption without backdoors, which gives strong privacy for Canadians, but can somewhat impair intelligence collection and law enforcement investigations. And contrasting your statement, there was a Five Eyes statement last July about wanting tech firms to allow law enforcement access to encrypted material. So I guess I'm hearing different messages from
Yeah,
Canadian
no,
agencies. Is Canada going to be developing a policy about what takes priority? Because I don't see how to satisfy both.
So I was speaking from the CSE mandate. We're not a law enforcement agency, and so that kind of question, if I had the RCMP or CSEs or public safety with me on that, those under the Minister of Public Safety, I'd probably look to them to answer that question. That's for the purpose of backdoors for law enforcement. It's not for the purposes of a cryptologic agency and cybersecurity agency. So it was more specific on investigations, so since we don't do that. Yeah.
So you mentioned about that your organization has to deal with a lot of stakeholders. So at the back of your mind, can you just point out which stakeholders are really difficult to deal with in your job and which stakeholders you think are creating a lot of value for you?
Well, look, Cyber Center just stood up in 2000. When it comes to foreign intelligence, we've had partners for a long time and well-worn roads around that. It gets to that whole elephant analogy, and my colleague Scott Jones, the head of the center, he often uses the analogy of the 5-year-old soccer game. Everyone's following the ball around. Everyone's going after the cyber. You know, the challenge we have is that cybersecurity is kind of like healthcare on speed, right? Like what we do with healthcare now, the standards we have, the regulations we have, what governments do what, how many hospitals do you need, how many nurses and doctors do you need to move through the system, what credentials should they have, what preventative medicine looks like, what good, what you should do to, run so much a day and eat certain ways, all that kind of stuff. You can start with 1867 on that and map that out over time and where we are now. Cybersecurity is that, but we're like 10 years too late and we've all got to do something fast. So I would say that we have no shortage of exuberant, passionate partners to work with. We're all figuring out our respective swim lanes. We're probably all doing good things, but are we doing the best things? And do we have getting the best return on investment for everything that we're doing? So there are a number of tables that we meet with, whether it's provincial governments, again, academia, private sector. There are some sort of things that we're looking from a force multiplier space. There's a military term coming in there. But things like the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange, where we can share tip information out to them, and then they can make that available to their clients. But the things like the open source assembly line, just getting stuff out there. I mean, we've got a real advantage too that with the Cyber Center, most of the work that we do there is unclassified. If I'm dealing with a partner and we're going to talk about foreign intelligence, you have to have a TSSI clearance. You've done psych, you've done poly, you've done all this stuff. On the cybersecurity side, you don't need to know how we found that malware signature. You just need to know what to do in order to protect yourself. So I'd say we're still in early days in terms of the whole, from a national perspective, to figure out how we're all going to best work together. Public safety as the cyber strategy lead would have a lot to say in that as well. Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time, so let's thank Scott again.
Thanks very much. Again, thanks very much to Jen and Ian. I appreciate the time here. And you can ask me any questions over lunch and hit me up.
Okay, and speaking of lunch, it's now.